Imagine you are writing a script to parse some logs. Every time you find a suspicious IP address, you need to query the VirusTotal API to check if it is malicious, and then the code goes on. If you have 50 IPs in the code, you could copy and paste the exact same API code 50 times. But is this an efficient way? Furthermore, if the API changes, you now have to fix your code in 50 different places. It is a nightmare to maintain. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Silent Defender. Today we are taking the repetitive tasks in our code and turning them into reusable weapons called functions. This is video 5 of the Python series. Before we start, let's create a separate branch and also a separate directory for this tutorial. Let's name this branch functions. And create a new folder by the name of functions, and inside that a Python file. Okay, so what exactly is a function? A function is a block of code that can be reused over and over again in the program efficiently. To create a function, we use the def keyword def, which stands for define, and after that we write the name of the function. In this case, let's choose this as scan target, followed by brackets and then a colon. Now, just like loops and statements, everything indented underneath this belongs to function. Let's put a print statement. Okay, now if we run this script, as you can see, nothing happens. We have only built the weapon, we haven't pulled the trigger. To actually run the code, we have to call the function by typing its name with parentheses in our script. So in this case, it would be as you can see, we have the output of scanning port 80. Now, a function that does the same exact thing every time is not very helpful. We need to feed it dynamic data. We do this using arguments. Think of arguments as the ammo of the weapon. Inside the parentheses of our definition, we create a variable. So in this case, let's name it port. Now, inside our function logic, we can say something like scanning port and then the port. Now, when we call the function, which is scan target, we have to pass it the ammo. We can type scan target, let's say 22, and then run it. The function catches the string or catches the integer in this case, plugs it into the variable and executes the logic. Here you can see scanning port 22. Now what if we want to scan a specific port, but 90% of the time it's just port 80? We can use default values. What we mean is that if you write something like scan target port and the same code as previous one, scanning port and then port, and when you call the function, so what if your use case is that if when you don't pass the value, it should pick up port 80 by default, and when you want to pass something else, you pass the value inside this. If you can see, as of now, if we run the script, there is a error, and the error states that one required argument port is missing. So the concept of default value is that you assign it something like port is equal to, and then you can type 80. Now when you run it, you can see the port of 80 has been scanned. And if you type anything else, for example, let's say 144, then the 144 value will be picked. So if you pass any value, that value will be chosen, and if you don't pass, the default value will be assigned. So far, our function just prints text to the screen, but in real script, printing is useless. We need the function to process data and handle the result back to the main script, so we can make some decisions. We do this using the return keyword. So instead of printing something like port open, we type return true. Let's try this out. We can do something like if port is equal to 22, return true, else return false. So when Python hits a return statement, two things happen. The function immediately stops and it spits that value back out. Now we can save the result in a variable, which in this case we can use is 22 and then run it. Let's pass something like 23. Okay. Let's also print this better. So as you can see, in this case, the value returned from this function is false. But if you pass something like 22, the value returned from the function is true. If you go line by line, as you can see, we call the function scan target and pass the value 22. The function, which is defined here, reads that value 22 inside the port variable. Then it checks if the value of port is 22. In this case, yes, it is. So it returns a Boolean value of true. When it returns the Boolean value of true, that true is assigned inside the variable of is22, since that function has stopped executing, and whatever value it had to return, it can be stored in the variable that is calling the function. So is22 is storing the true value. In this case, if you type any other port, the value stored inside is22 will be false. Sometimes you don't know how much ammo you are going to need. What if you are going to pass one port today but 5 ports tomorrow? You can use arguments and keyword arguments. So by putting an asterisk in front of an argument, Python takes every single thing you pass into the function and packs it into a tuple. For example, so in this case, it does not matter how many values we pass. We can pass only one value, which could be 22. We can pass 3 values, in this case 22, 80 and 443. All the values will be captured here and assigned and put inside a tuple. So if you want to reference this, you can do looping inside. For example, for x in arguments, you can print x. Here you can see 22, 80 and 443. All three are parts of this variable. To get a good look, you can also directly print the arguments and you can see all three are packed inside a tuple. Keyword arguments does the exact same thing, but it packs them into a dictionary, so you can use key value pairs. For example, what if you are passing something like, let's say, threshold equal to 5 and number of ports equal to 10. Here you can see, so whenever we pass key value pairs inside the function, you can capture them using keyword arguments and then you can print them and you can see that they are stored in a dictionary as a key value pair. To summarize this, let's do a very simple exercise. Let's try to find the sum of n numbers where n could be anything. So let's define a function sum of numbers where any number of numbers could be passed. And what we are trying to do is to calculate the sum. Let's initialize this sum variable with 0. And eventually, let's return sum. So if you see this function, whenever any number of numbers will be passed, we are initializing a variable by the name of sum 0. And for every value inside that arguments, we are doing sum is equal to sum plus x, which will increment the value of sum for every value inside arguments. So whenever you call this function sum of numbers, we can pass anything we want. And since we are returning the value, we can store it inside some variable and eventually print it. Let's run it. As you can see, the answer is 100, 40, 30, 20, 10. So that summarizes the concept of functions, and I'll pause the video so I can clean up this code and we can push it to the centralized GitHub repository. Okay, so the cleanup has been done and we can go ahead with pushing this code. So we can just add this. Okay, so the link has been generated. We are creating a pull request. And let's delete the branch. Okay. So as you can see, we are back in the main branch, and let's do a git pull for a clean copy. So this is it for the concept of functions. Like, share, and subscribe to secure your feed, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep defending.